DM Dango here with another review from the DM's Guild. This time we're looking at Finders Keepers, an epic level adventure for 20th level characters. They're notoriously difficult to get right. Let's see how this one does. Finders Keepers by Janik Selecki is a 20th level, so epic level adventure for 4 to 5 players. Expect this to run probably 3 sessions, so 4 hours each, roughly. Maybe a little longer depending on how much RP your players do and how long they take on every single thing. Now, I will say this is that each chapter in of its own probably can be its own self-contained adventure, with the exception of Chapter 3, which is kind of like your big culmination bit. However, Chapters 2 and 1 could easily be run by themselves for the most part. If you were just looking for something interesting to do as a one-shot, either of those 2 chapters could very easily be run on them. So Chapter 1 consists of a red dragon assault, and then a foray into its lair, either with the dragon, depending on how the battle previously went, or without it. Now, I'm not going to spoil everything here, but there is another interested party, and there are other machinations occurring. Finders Keepers is all hinged around the idea of the Book of Keeping, which is the book that holds all the devil's true names, or a section of them. It doesn't hold all of them, obviously. There are names like Asmodeus isn't technically a true devil, but other things like the Demogorgon and all of those kinds of creatures, and everything in the Yugoloths and all of those would also be contained in one of these books. And if you know a devil's true name, you can get it to do whatever you want, because that's how devils work and that's how the lore works. But essentially there is a secondary party that's coming along and dealing with this thing. Now, as part of that, once you've successfully gone through and dealt with the red dragon, you go into a demi-plane of which a god is dying but not dead, but not alive either, but is constantly dreaming, and his dreams affect the universe and the world and the multiverse around him, constantly spilling out into the plane where he exists and forming an area called Crust. Now, I love that idea. I love that concept, that idea that a god that is dead isn't really... It's very hard to actually permanently kill a god. So even their bodies, their corpses become something of places of rest. If you think about the Guardians of the Galaxy, the first movie, there was that gigantic titan that a colony had sprung out of. That's very evocative and very similar to this kind of thought. There is a huge sprawling landscape of peoples that have lived there. People like planeswalkers, anyone with ability to transport via planes. But getting to this specific spot is quite difficult. It requires very specific rituals to kind of keep this thing. And this dead god knew where one of these books were. You go in to retrieve it. Once you've done so, you come out, and then you need to decide what to do with the book. And then all the interested parties come together and vie for this book, this power. Now, your players can decide what to do with it at that point. You can give it to the angels, you can give it to demons, you can give it to devils, or you can just hold it yourself and try and maintain control of one of the most powerful artifacts in all of the multiverse for as long as you can. You could attempt to destroy the book, but good luck with that. It is, after all, an artifact, and artifacts by their nature are very difficult to destroy. Right, so I've told you about the adventure and what it contains. Now let's go into what I liked. I really like the overall feel of the adventure. This is a very well done, epic level adventure. In terms of the feel you get out of it, the consequences, the stakes that are in play, it feels like something 20th level characters would do, tier 4 characters. They are powerful. They are nearly gods themselves. Get up worshippers, and probably one of the clerics or the druids would be a god. Ascending to godhood is not without, or not outside of the realms of possibility. So it fits that everything in here is structured around that idea. You are powerful. You are called not because you're the only people. You're not called because, oh, here's some gold. You're called because there's no one else strong enough to do this. So the first thing you fight, the very first encounter you have, is with an ancient red dragon. And that's acceptable at this level. Now, the combat encounter itself is incredibly difficult to manage for a DM because you have flight involved, you have a lot of high levels, especially if you have casters in there, and if you don't, a lot of those classes have an insane amount of damage. You're talking huge amounts of dice rolls, especially if you have, say, a rogue and they have like their sneak attack, which is like 10d6 plus whatever their damage is. So yeah, it gets a little insane with the amount of damage and stuff that's going flying out every single round. Now, let's say a red dragon on its own, actually for a party of 20th level characters, isn't actually much of a challenge due to the action economy, and 2, the fact of the way things work. But then you go into its lair and you learn more things about what's going on and kind of what's happening. And you get this kind of really great high-level dungeon crawl kind of thing. And then you fight a lot of very interesting monster types that don't normally occur in terms of their groupings. And if you have 20th level characters, they will have fought these monsters before and maybe learned enough about them to know some of their tricks. Most specifically, things like how certain creatures reproduce and how they make more of themselves. And you can use that to make the fights easier if you know about them. And even if you don't, you can probably still succeed just due to the fact that how powerful you are. And that's really nice to see, to have this kind of like, well, here's something you can probably succeed, you can brute force this. Or if you're clever, you might be able to just win more easily. And I like to see that. And then there's more little twists and turns throughout the whole adventure arc. You get to the point where there are creatures that ordinarily, when you were lower level, you were terrified of, like hags and night hags and beholders. But at 20th level, you bitch slap them. And that's kind of how it should be. But there's enough challenge there, mental challenge for your players, to kind of give you more to do. Moving on from that section, you go into this dreamscape, and I really love that idea of a dead god with a spear, so it's an arrow through its head, and its dreams spilling out and causing ghosts and poltergeists and all kinds of things. Ghosts are an interesting monster in themselves because, by their nature, they're still threatening even at high levels. So it's really, really great to see that. In addition to that, at the final end, you have what is probably one of the best moral quandaries you can get. You have a choice of who to give the Book of the Keepers to, and depending on your choice, you may have a combat encounter, you might not. Or if you're clever, maybe you figure out a way of using the book to kind of maybe even end the Great Demon Devil War, or at least tip it on one side or the other. It's really nice to see that kind of epic level play done very well. So in addition to all of that, all of the kind of great chapters in alone, I really like the style of the maps. They're very different from anything else I've seen on other DM's Guild's products, and they work really well, particularly the map for the Dreaming God. It's a very good way of kind of representing this kind of metaphysical realm, as it were. That very kind of crazy, off-the-wall, bazonker, ballsy, crazy style. It gives that kind of very interesting way of thinking about things that makes me really love it. So, not every rose can be perfect, and this one does have its thorns. And specifically, one of those thorns in my side is that in the early chapter, chapter 1, there's a character that's introduced as this betrayal character, this traitor type. It would be nice to have included a kind of rumor section. Tomb of Annihilation does this very well. You have this section where it says, here are all the rumors you can learn. It's part of, if you do a general investigation check in the area of Port Nyanzaru, you will learn these things. Not all of them are true. Some of them are false. Some of them are very, very vague. But it gives you a good understanding of kind of what's going on in kind of the general area of Chult. Without that, you kind of have to very on the fly as a DM figure out this stuff. It's like, well, what do the people know? What do, the Grand Viziers know? What do the general, advisors know, and all this kind of stuff. And it would be nice to just include, here's what these people kind of know, and this is what you can learn from the general populace about all of this stuff. Not all of it has to be true, and you always roll on the table to kind of make it a little interesting and different and unique for a player maybe who's seen some of this, or maybe has experienced bits of it, and kind of throw like red herrings down. False clues are fine as long as you have enough real ones to kind of combat it. But that's kind of like a minor thing. There's just not enough to say pin it on this person before you get there. In fact, the bigger problem with this is that until she reveals herself, there's nothing for a player to suspect them. There's no reason for the players to suspect them, and so you don't. Because you don't, unless your players are paranoid or they've cast spells specifically to do this kind of thing, it makes it hard. It makes it really hard to kind of just go, well, I don't trust her because I don't trust her. It would be better to have like a narrative reason behind that to kind of go, well, these people suspect these things, and here are the rumors that they know about, and here's the things they know about. Otherwise, the characters aren't going to suspect them. And if they don't suspect them, if they don't suspect this character at all, why didn't they just carry on the charade? That's the thing that kind of gets me. It's like, you just can carry on the charade, change it slightly as this character, and carry it on and just kind of hope that nobody catches you. And you could probably do that for quite a while as long as nobody rumbled you, especially if you had no person doubting you. And why would they doubt you without any information, without any facts? You're just going on gut feel, and that's kind of hard to sell. This isn't really necessarily a negative, more of a warning. There are a lot of very complicated fights in this. The battles that occur, both the first one, which is the Red Dragon, which is already a very complicated fight because the dragon you're working out 3 dimensions because the dragon is flying and probably the players are flying, and the dragon can breathe fire, and it can do a whole bunch of other things because it's a dragon, it has legendary actions. Then you go into another combat encounter that has multiple creatures that have multiple things and they have spells as well. These are very complex to run fights for a DM. If you're a baby DM looking for a high-level adventures by themselves are complicated because there's a lot going on. Players have access to a lot of things and a lot of stuff they can do, and you have to be thinking, especially if you're playing spellcasters against spellcasters, because you have to think is like, whoa, how smart is this spellcaster in comparison to the wizards or the sorcerers, and is it worth counterspelling it, or is it worth doing something else instead? It's all of that kind of thoughts and things that are flying around. If you've ever watched Critical Role, The Final Battle, watch that fight. If you don't want to, if you're interested in Critical Role, watch the rest of it. It's great. But if you want to watch just like a fight with a high-level spellcaster, that's a great one. There's a hell of a lot going on, and Matt is managing to keep all of that going, and it's a spellcaster. I think it's a spellcaster, and there's a couple of other things around, and a multitude of party members with multiple spells that do multiple effects across a huge range of things, and he's managing it very well. That's the kind of encounters you can expect to have in this kind of adventure. So it's not so much a criticism, but a warning of, this isn't for baby DMs. This is for people, this is for DMs and players specifically who know what they're doing. The encounters they're not deadly for the level, but they are deadly for the player's skill, especially if you're playing against these creatures, because they will not hold back. They will try and kill you, and the players' characters will probably die. Now, obviously, if you're playing 20th level characters, you can have the option to play pre-gen ones that are included with the module, which is a great idea. But you might want to play with your existing characters, so be careful is all I can say here. On to my final rating now that I've rambled on about encounters and all of that kind of stuff. So let's do it with the same system we've been using, the perk system. So we're going to start with combat. Combat here is well thought out. The way it's done and the way it's structured is very, very good for 20th level encounters. Because of the way 20th level encounters work, and because of how many dice, how long a turn can take, each individual player, because of what they're trying to do, because of the amount of options they have, because as you go higher and higher in level, you get more and more options. This is true across all classes. Even ones as simple as monk. Oh, I hit them with my fist. Well, you hit them with your fist and you might want to stun them and you might want to go faster and you might want to do this and you might want to do that. It's not that simple anymore at that level. So combat is done very well. There's not a overwhelming amount of it. It's more focused on both problem solving and puzzle solving, and then a moral quandary, which is a better way of doing it. And then the combat that is included is really well done and really interesting, and the things that can occur during those combats and the things that are in the arenas. So for combat, I give it a 5 out of 5. So our role play. There's a lot to do here, and there's a lot of ways you can roleplay yourself out of a situation, or probably into one, and more likely. You need to be able to gather information in the second chapter in order to figure out how you actually get this book. How do you get it from this god that's dead? How do you pull it from a thing? What do you need to do? And there's a lot of roleplay potential there to figure these things out. Or spells like augury and clairvoyance would probably bypass most of that. But let's leave those to the side. It is nice to see that there is this good roleplay thread that exists across things. And even the final chapter, when you're making the decision to where to put the book in, there's a lot of really great roleplay potential. Up to the point including even player versus player combat, if your group allows for that kind of stuff, or likes that kind of stuff more specifically. It means that players can choose to side with one or the other, maybe an independent party, or keep the book for themselves, for whatever reason they might have as a player or character. It's really great to see this huge arc end in this really satisfying but slightly morally gray way. No one is a good guy in the end of this, and, well, the best choice tends to be the worst. I really like this, the roleplay potential. I give it a 5. Now, moving on to exploration. This, unfortunately, is where some of this is diluted by the fact that it is a very linear adventure. You go from point to point to point and kind of end up at this final location, this final showdown, and this kind of deal you make with one party or another. There are a lot of exploration potential in the second chapter where you're on Crust, but it's kind of diluted by the fact that you have almost a ticking clock, as it were, of you need to get this thing done before something horrible happens or somebody else gets there first. So it kind of dilutes the whole exploration tab of this, and I do have to deduct some points here for that, so I give it a 4 here. Finally, P for polish. How does it stack up? What are things that I think make this thing a top tier 5 adventure, perfect 5 stars across the board? Well, it's got maps, really great ones, and they're included in a separate file, most of them. The world map, and more specifically the map for Crust, are included in separate files, and it would have been nice to include those. Also, the Dreamlet tokens that are included aren't included as separate files. They're there in the PDF, but it needs to kind of be part of that separate files, because it means that it's easier to integrate into things like virtual tabletop, and even just to print them out, because you can always you can whack the resolution a lot higher, just to make it a little nicer of a file. The other thing that's included in here that I really liked, it was kind of an interesting bit, maybe not for a DM or a player, really interesting for somebody who's trying to write these adventure modules. It includes a making of section, how they came up with the ideas, where they were going to go, how they got the editing done, how they did all the various things, and how they kind of, chose to do what they did. And it was really, really nice to see kind of that process laid out in a very specific way. And I love that. And I love that as a potential content creator for my own stuff. It's nice to see how you go from just doing adventures and building them for your own groups and to publishing them on the DM's Guild. And it's nice to see kind of where the thought processes were and why things were done the way they were. So things like, why did they choose these particular arts, this particular art style for this? Why did they choose these pieces of art here? What kind of writing they did? What was the editing like? How did they do the testing? All of that kind of stuff was really, really interesting to pull out and say, ooh, so that's why that's that way. And that's why what is going on and what is going on in the mind of the author. I will say that this is one of the probably the better polished ones that I've seen. The maps are more interesting than things that I've seen. While they're not as heavily detailed as some of the ones that you get in things like the Dungeon Masters, things like the Official Wizards of the Coast stuff, they are very visually interesting to me. They're very minimalistic, but at the same time keeping enough information on the map to kind of give players imagination. And I would use these straight out as they are, because they're just very, very good maps. It's very hard to describe exactly things, but it would have been nice to include all of them as a separate file rather than some of them. So I do have to knock a point off for that. So I give it a 4 there. My total. That's a 4 for polish, a 5 for combat, a 5 for roleplay, and a 4 for exploration. So by my reckoning, that gives it a 4.5 out of 5. So on DM's Guild, I'll rate it a 4 out of 5, just because that's the way their system works, and it seems to be kind of the most fair way of doing things. But I really like this adventure overall. I really like the way it was done, and I really like the very, very well done attempt at an epic level adventure. It's hard to get these right. Maintaining the balance between insanely overpowered PCs and insanely overpowered monster types and creature types and things like that, and still giving the players a challenge without mopping the floor with them. It's a very delicate balance to keep, and they've done it very well here. Pick up Finders Keepers. You can use my affiliate code, which will be in the description down below. Thank you. Please do remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Thank you, and peace out.